I'm not saying this because I think black people should not be educated, but I am saying that black people very largely educate themselves. What you have to do is pick up the tools and with your own intention. You know, that's the trick.
There's a great temptation currently in education. Simplify the issues under the illustration that if we simplify them enough, people will recognize these issues. James Baldwin said these exact words 61 years ago when asked about being black in America. He would go on to expand on this notion by stating, such an illustration is very dangerous because, in fact, it isn't the way it works. A complex thing cannot be made simple. I want to start there because to be a black educator today and relatively conscious is to be frequently disappointed in the attempts to make simple the experiences that take place in the space that no longer resembles an educational environment, but a political debate forum. We have become so hopeless that we want to believe that the same educational institutions that have mastered decades of oppression and damaging practices for black and brown students and staff can somehow change course and make a correction. What's much more concerning is that when you look at the specific strategies, they include refraining from calling out racism for what it is, but instead give it a much more inviting title, survey people, then form a committee, only to say it's not about race, even though the majority of the examples related to these euphemisms are steeped in racial undertones. I just described a majority of educational organizations, including the self-proclaimed progressive ones. This damaging cycle of organizational baby steps towards popular buzz-woke words that no longer hold meaning persists, creating comfort for those who are the least impacted and further discomfort for those who are most impacted. In a growing number of states, it is illegal to even mention race in the classroom. In at least one state, there is a bill to ban uncomfortable dialogue related to race within the school, as if black students and staff have not felt uncomfortable in school since 1954. All of this sets the stage for a critical point in time, a place where we find a fork in the road of sorts, approval or liberation. The path most frequently traveled results in actively seeking the approval of others. Though it's easy to see the problems in seeking the approval of those we consider toxic, there's something much more complex at play. That being, seeking the approval of people and organizations that claim to be in an alignment with our beliefs on topics that have been co-opted, such as equity, inclusion, and diversity, yet these same people and organizations subscribe to beliefs that uphold white supremacy. Simply stated, they model a power structure that requires you to depend on them. I've said this before, any sustained advocacy group that does not seek to empower the same people they are speaking for is too close to an oppressive group for me. We see this constantly in the funding of black-led organizations and ideas. Yeah, I'm gonna go there. You could put DEI in front of any grant, but if the organization hasn't consistently been involved in working through their bias related to black people, their funding patterns oftentimes reinforce racism. If you can only envision us as entertainers, fashion designers, and athletes who are not intellectuals, proposals that deviate from these narratives or are not stereotypically black face great challenges in securing funding. It's exhausting. So what do? With not many options, we turn around, head back to the same fork in the road, and begin heading down a different path. The path less traveled, a journey towards liberation. As a liberated educator, you become comfortable being your authentic self and speaking your truth, unapologetically, regardless of who's in the room. You find solace knowing that where you are can best be described as the pinnacle of self-discovery. Even then, a painful question hits you in the face sooner or later. What's a liberated educator that still upholds oppressive practices? What's a liberated organization that wants to control your voice or want you to be the gatekeeper for those who look like you? What's a liberated and disruptive leader who is threatened by other up-and-coming younger leaders who look just like them, so they begin to use their influence to block the progression of those they label as arrogant? Though these are the questions we must ponder as a collective, there's one more dynamic that may be the most important in a time of divisiveness. That being, there is enough room for all of us. Turn each other down to secure a Birkin bag or to talk on the money phone is trash. I mean absolute trash. We've gotten to the point where organizations don't even have to uphold practices that attempt to control us and stifle our growth because we do it for them as collateral for job security. Allow me to have a Mike Jones moment and repeat what I just said to make sure you don't miss it. We've gotten to the point where organizations don't even have to uphold practices that attempt to control us and stifle our growth because we do it for them as collateral for job security. That's deep. As you listen over the next 2 nights to some of the best speakers on some of the most timely and relevant topics, I want you to ask yourself a pivotal question as an educator. Which path will you take when you arrive to the fork in the road? Approval for selfish gain or liberation for the collective? Our students are waiting for you to decide. I present to you SBE22, the State of Black Educators Symposium.
First guard.
Welcome to the State of Black Educator Symposium, Day 1, February 3rd. It's great to see each and every one of you and also all of you being a part of the space. It is my humble and excited energies that I have to introduce our first speaker on this today event. And so our speaker today is Dr. Gul Nassar Muhammad. She is an associate professor of literacy, language, and culture at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She studies Black historical excellence within educational communities with goals of reframing curriculum and instruction today. Dr. Muhammad's scholarship has appeared in leading academic journals and books, including Research in the Teaching of Language, English, Urban Education, Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy, Language Arts, and Written Communication. Amongst her many recognitions and awards that she has received, in 2020, the American Educational Research Association awarded her the Division K Early Career Award. And also in 2021, the NCTE Outstanding Elementary Educator, the English Language Arts. So many great accolades Dr. Muhammad has acquired. But in addition to all of that, the United States Department of Education granted her $750,000 to study culturally and historically responsive literacy in STEM classrooms. Now, she brings a wide range of expertise. Now, check this out. She has served as a middle school teacher, a literacy specialist, a district administrator, and check this out, a school board president. Now, who all can say that they've done all those things? Now, Dr. Muhammad is also an amazing author of a book, best-selling book, Cultivating Genius, an Equity Model for Culturally Historically Responsive Literacy. She's also authored many other books, Black Girls Literacies, an edited volume by the Routledge organization. She works with teachers, leaders, parents, and also youth across the United States and also South Africa on best practices in culturally and historically responsive instruction. Her historically responsive literacy, culturally and historically responsive education model, believe it or not, has been adopted across the state of the United States in many school districts, including Chicago and New York. Now, again, I highly encourage each and every one of you to pick up her book, Cultivating Genius. And after you grab her book, be sure you grab a highlighter and also a stack of Post-it notes. So without further ado, as a co-founder of BME STL, also powered by EDU Openings, I am super excited to bring you none other than Dr. Muhammad.
Thank you so much, brother. Thank you for that warm and beautiful introduction.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. It brings me great joy for number one, to be with you, and number two, to be able to just give you your flowers and give you your roses, you know, all the great work that you've done in our region, not necessarily our region per se, but across the country and also in other countries as well. So definitely something that I'm taking notes on as I try to model behind you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So before we get started, it is a little known fact that the idea around having a convening of ideas in St. Louis sparked the State of Black Educators Symposium, right? Because the co-founders, Dr. Fields and myself, what we wanted to do is that we were looking for a table built of rich mahogany with fine wood and the grain that's accentuated by history, as well as the truths of people that have previously been excluded and marginalized. And so in that, why not build our own table to make sure that people can have a seat at that table? And so that's how the State of Black Educator Symposium came about. And this year is year 3, and we are definitely most excited to have this for a 3rd year in a row. So as we get started, Dr. Muhammad, first of all, thank you for this. Let's start with this. How did we get here? If you don't mind, please give your perspective of the current state of Black educators and their navigation through these historic moments.
Wow. Well, first let me say congratulations on 3 years and for creating your own space. I feel like when we study Black educators throughout history, we have always created our spaces for ourselves, the spaces where none have existed before. And so we've created our own tables, as you said, beautifully through the metaphor. So congratulations on space creation, because that's what we constantly need to do for ourselves and for our children. Because the spaces that currently exist in education are not all designed to nurture us, for us to sit at, for us to thrive in. When I think about the current state of education and of Black educators, I always go back into history. When I look at just the current state of education, right, that did not include Blackness or Black people, I just see mediocre. I see basicness. I don't see genius. I see a system built on whiteness as a construct with white representation and curriculum and policies and mandates and standards. I see practices of what we did in the 1600s, very similar, if not the same, of what we do in 2021, now going into 2022. I see a lack of rigor. I see a lack of identity development in our curriculum and our instruction. I see a lack of joy. I see a lack of consciousness and justice when I look at those historical understandings of what makes education today that excludes Blackness. But then when I shift to looking at Blackness and education from the continent of Africa throughout different countries to the history in the United States, I see the complete opposite. I see greatness. I see a model to educate all. I always said to myself, if you want to know how to educate all children, go to Black educators. if you want to know how to get it right for all children, especially our children who have been greatly underserved and marginalized in our schools, go back to our history. Our history has taught us what our children need to read, how they need to think, what they need to do, how to learn reading, writing, thinking, mathematics, science, and all these things. Because I see greatness, and that's where a lot of my work is really stemming from, is looking at our ancestral genius to teach us what we need to do differently and what we need to sustain and what do we need to just do better in education today. Because we're at a state where people are not listening to Black education. People are not even centering Black educators and our experiences in these schools. A lot of Black teachers and administrators are feeling marginalized just like the children are. But our joy, our consciousness, how we teach art isn't being used well or listened to. And so we are sort of forced to teach this curriculum and these models that are so like different than who we are at our core from our history. So as a result, we have a lot of children, our children, that's not responding to this system because the system was not designed for them. The system was not built to nourish and water them as flowers. And, you know, so in my work, I'm calling to really pinpoint the things that our ancestors did historically, and then use those to, you know, come into the classroom today and say, you know what, if they did this in the 1800s, we can do it today.
Absolutely. And that dovetails into my next question, because as we talk about history and our ancestors and things that if we want to do better or be better, we must find, not necessarily find it, but we must do what it has been excluded or, you know, pushed aside. And that's, you know, phenomenal work, because in your book, you created a framework, if you will, for culturally and historically responsive literacy. Mm-hmm. And so if we can dive into that, because what we all know is that the word equity has like exploded across the landscape of education in a way that people have a wide range of thoughts of what equity is. Mm-hmm. For those that are living in the system, we know what it is not, mm-hmm. right? So if you don't mind, if you could just bring together your equity framework and then what equity truly is in practice. Can you speak to that for me?
Yeah, so if I start with equity, in the book, I describe equity through a poem. And this poem was given to me by my father, and it was written by a Persian author in 1258, so many, many years ago in the 13th century. And the poem says, the human race, I'm paraphrasing a little bit because the poem was originally in Farsi and then translated to English, but he's saying in this poem that human beings are of one essence, right? Humanity. And when by hard fortune, one limb of your humanity is oppressed, is hurt, is harmed, is underserved. And he says in the poem, and you sleep well at night, you don't lose your rest. You sleep well, you go on. Then he says, you don't deserve to be called human. See, for me, equity is like seeing humanity, all people as one body. And when one arm is hurt, is oppressed, that arm can be Black lives, that arm can be immigrants. It doesn't matter. If anybody is hurt or treated unfairly in this world, they are a part of your limbs. If we are talking about humanity. Now, if your arm is broken, you're going to feel it in the rest of your body. That's what equity is. Equity means I feel it and I'm speaking it out into existence and I'm healing my arm. Even if that arm doesn't look like me, even if that arm doesn't live where I live, that's what equity is. Equity is this pursuit in education, including our leadership, our materials, our policies, our curriculum, a pursuit toward liberation, freedom, and justice. You don't get people think equity is just access to something educational. Oh, I gave them this textbook is equity. I gave them this children's book, equity. I put more books in the classroom or in the home, equity. No, you're just putting more multicultural books in the home, and that's great. But unless we have policy and practice that somehow get to justice, criticality, liberation, and freeing through the teaching and learning and assessment, we don't fully have equity. So we have to move on notions that equity is just merely representation or access and inclusion. Because you can have access to strong literature and still teach it in deficit ways. You can have access to a program, like there's one program in New York called AP for All, where regardless of testing, every child can have access to AP courses at the high school level. Now, people say, is this an equity program? I say yes, but it's a Band-Aid equity. Because you notice you did not fix the AP program. You just sort of put a Band-Aid. Students can have access to that program, but they cannot test and get AP credit. You see what I'm saying? So we have to be able to differentiate between real equity, freedom, liberatory practices in education, and Band-Aid equity. We just want to check it off or just give some mere access or representation. So in the book, I give this equity model, and I call it historically responsive literacy because Black people use literacy and education as synonyms. To be educated was to be literacy, to be literate, to have literacy. Literacy was the means for Black people to everything. If you are reading, writing, thinking, speaking, listening, making sense of the world, you do it through literacy. If you're studying mathematics, you're doing it through literacy. If you're studying science, art, literacy was everything. It was at the root and foundation of all learning. So in this model, I found that Black folks had 5 pursuits for learning. So every time they gathered together to educate themselves and each other and their children, they were really setting goals or standards around 5 areas. And the first is identity. They were learning who they are, who they're not, who they are destined to be. They were having a strong sense of self. And you got to keep in mind, identity was important for Black people because when they were stolen and brought here, our ancestors, the first thing they stripped was their name and their identity and their language, and rename them, right? Identity matters. We are constantly claiming and reclaiming who we are and whose we are. And then the second thing with identity too, Black folks didn't just learn about themselves, they learned about each other. I found examples of them reading about Chinese fashion and culture. They didn't just learn about Blackness, they learned about all sorts of cultures. The second pursuit they had was skill development. They were learning proficiencies needed across the discipline areas. The third is intellectualism. They were becoming smarter about new people, places, things, concepts, histories, current events. Intellectualism matters. The fourth pursuit is criticality. Criticality is a state of being. It's learning how to name, understand, disrupt, hurt, pain, and harm in the world. Oppression, like racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, ageism, religious discrimination. They were learning about oppression and disrupting it. Criticality is what makes the world better. Because you could feel that limb hurting, right? But the next step is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to get help for healing? Are you going to help others, right? That's what criticality does. And the fifth pursuit they had was joy. And it wasn't just having fun and celebrating with one another. It was naming, observing, embodying beauty, aesthetics in the world. Now they had 5 pursuits of learning. Now you have equity if you are teaching, leading, assessing these 5 areas. Because what we're doing in schools today is just 1/5. We're just teaching skills. And oftentimes those skills are isolated and decontextualized to the world. So students are like, what do these skills got to do with me? And I asked that too. You know, we shouldn't be teaching anything that's disconnected to students' lives and to the world around them. We shouldn't be teaching any way that feels, so neutral. Like, teach them about justice and how to make the world better for social change. And I gotta tell you, we're just not teaching this way in teacher education programs largely. I went to Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, where I learned, about Vygotsky and Piaget and Maslow. I didn't learn about Mary McLeod Bethune and Black theorists who centered Black, Indigenous people of color and our genius and our joy and our liberation. So I had to play catch up and educate myself on how to educate our children. So this model becomes like a very practical way of teachers going into every unit plan, every classroom and saying, okay, do I have these 5 things in my learning, in my teaching? And how am I teaching these 5 things? And how am I assessing these things? So it gives more practicality. So these ideals of equity don't have to just stay in theoretical space. They can move into a practical model. They can move into action where teachers can use it every day.
More from Dr. Muhammad after a brief word from our sponsors.
At Lindbergh Schools, we are committed to helping every student succeed, not only in academics, but also in life. At Lindbergh, we prepare our students for success through innovative instruction that focuses on collaboration, creativity, communication, and critical thinking. This high-quality education for all students is propelled by strong community support and a team of excellent teachers, support staff, and administrators. I love working for the Lindbergh School District. If you want to be fly like us and earn your wings, join us here at Lindbergh.
Smith, and I lead the work of the Innovative Technology Education Fund, ITEF. We are a local grant maker dedicated to funding the innovative ideas of educators in the metro area. We know that the past 2 years have taken a toll on you. With that in mind, on June 16 and 17, ITEF, the Stanford D School, and St. Louis University will host a professional learning experience. Details coming soon on our website, innovteched.com.
Yeah. And, I had a light bulb moment as you were speaking about the 5, to your equity framework. As a former high school administrator, we really dive super deep on college and career readiness for kids. But in hearing you speak, it's almost like, hey, we were so focused on the skills to get to college and career ready. We were almost missing a large swath of what we could be or could have given students to be life ready.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, with that thinking and hitting all of the 5 pillars, how do you see your work and empowering the cultivation of genius in an era of critical race theory? What are your thoughts?
Well, we've always lived in eras of critical race theory. I think people are using it and misappropriating it now. But, I think people have to first understand what is theory. Theory is not a solution. Theory aren't strategies. Theory isn't a model. Theory is just an explanation that explains something, that explains phenomenon. And in this way, in critical race theory, it helps to explain why people are mistreated, marginalized, exploited, misrepresented, any kind of word like that due to their race. And I noticed something as people in these states are trying to push laws and policies of non-critical race theory, anti-critical race theory. I asked myself first, do they understand what theory is? No one is teaching critical race theory in K-12. I didn't learn of it into my PhD program. And then I thought, why didn't they ban feminism? That is an explanation that explains why people are mistreated due to their gender of being identified as a woman or a girl. Why didn't they ban cognitive theory? which explains what happens in the mind as children are learning. I thought, why didn't they ban social cultural theory that explains the social environment and what happens and how the social and cultural environment impacts what happens? No, why didn't they ban critical theory? Now, critical theory is the larger umbrella that says why people are mistreated, marginalized due to their religion, their gender, race. You got all their social economic status. See, they're not going to do that because there's some white folks that are poor that are being marginalized. They're like, no, we don't want to ban that. We want to teach that. Let's ban the theory that deals mostly with Black people. So we have to be very smart of what's happening. This erasure that has been happening with our scholarship, with our justice, with our joy, with our genius is still showing up today. But see, they know that they cannot put down on the paper, let's ban Black people, let's ban their histories, their justice, let's ban the truth. We can't put that on paper. That would make us look bad. And when you study the 1800s forward, there have been some hateful folks that have been putting things on paper that said, let's word it this way so it doesn't make us look bad. I'll give you one example. The United Daughters of the Confederacy in the 1800s said, they rewrote the script of teaching about slavery. They said Black people were happy. What is this? That there was violence. They were happy as slaves, and they would teach women and girls a script because those were mostly the teachers. And if you teach girls, you could start to shift a whole generation. And they started to teach this script into our classroom. And then people started to learn that slavery wasn't a bad thing because they were so intentional of not letting their ancestors look bad. So I'm saying all this to say is that we have to really understand what is theory and what is the purpose of, banning critical race theoretical teachings, because they're not banning the theory. I guess they're banning teaching and books that's related to teaching about why Black people are treated unfairly. This is what they're banning. No teaching of why Black people are marginalized or treated. They are not marginalized. They get the same opportunities as everybody else in the curriculum. This is the message. And we have to be very smart about hearing the message correctly. They're saying we're not banning Black people, we're banning teaching about their marginalization. And we're like, we cannot understand today unless we teach about the justice and the marginalization of the past. That's what we are saying. So where my model comes in, my model, yes, it is a model that is embodied within cognitive theory, social cultural theory, constructivism, critical theory, critical race theory, feminism. A lot of different theories can be used to think through my model. The part of the pursuit of criticality, that's mostly tied to critical race theory. So criticality is helping students to name, understand, disrupt injustice. That can be based on somebody's race, gender, sexuality, where they live, where they're from, age. They're not banning ageism. Teaching children not to treat somebody unfairly due to their age. They're not banning classism. Teaching students not to treat somebody unfairly due to their money, how much money they have or don't have. They're trying to ban racism, which mostly deals with Black people. So my model is a part of it, but I guarantee you some people are more comfortable teaching girl power than Black power. That's still criticality, girl power, sure. But in my work, you cannot choose your oppressions that you teach and think across. You cannot say, well, I'm only going to teach about gender equality and not racial equality or not other types of equality. You have to educate yourself, cultivate your own genius, and teach students how to be prepared for the world. Because even college and career readiness, they're going to be exposed to new people, new cultures, and new forms of self. And they have to be ready for that. And that's what this model does. So, it's a model that can really address so many wonderful issues But you can also take my model and say, well, I'm going to use it to for my own gain, for my own comfort. And that's not why it was written. It was written to address a diverse set of issues and types of oppressions in the world.
And as we think about, just the next era or the next generation of educators, or even those that are, veterans that are still in the game, like, we can't only dip our toe in when it comes to working with young people and benefiting them for the future. Like, we have to be all in, right? Very similar to Double Dutch. You can't just hang out on the sideline. You have to be like all in the rotation of, the ropes or the turner. And
Sure.
With that said, at the symposium, we're going to have pre-service teachers as well as veteran practitioners, right? And so as they're, with us, it's also vastly important that a situation is created for them to not only identify genius, but to also foster this mindset that, hey, we can do this, and this is how this can happen. Like, what does it look like to empower genius and cultivate it in our space? Like, what would you suggest or recommend, to these either pre-service or veteran practitioners in the empowerment of cultivating genius?
Well, I think the work always begins with self, knowing who you are and whose you are. Who do you belong to when it comes, and who are you doing this work for? When I was a school district administrator in Cahokia, I had a lot of good times and a lot of uncomfortable times working with different colleagues. And I had to really say, who am I? Do I want to follow the status quo, or do I want to break away? What do I believe in that children need? Regardless of policy, curriculum, mandates, no. Who are you accountable to? And I told myself as a 21, 22-year-old teacher that I'm not accountable to the principal. I love the principal. And she and I agreed on nearly everything. But I'm not first accountable to her. I'm not first accountable to the superintendent. I'm accountable to our children and their families. And then to my parents and the ancestors. It was a long list before we got to the principal. And usually that now, and if you work with an administrator that pretty much feels like, I had a principal that felt like my family. It felt like those were woven in, but we have to think like, we're not doing this work for tenure, for shine, for anything but the progression of those children. And when you have to first keep your mind focused on who you are, whose you are, and to what end. Why are you doing this work? When times get a little overwhelming as a teacher, you might have to ask yourself, okay, why am I a teacher? Why am I a teacher? Go through those things and ask yourself, well, where is my own identity? How much do I know myself? Where are my own skills? You can't struggle with writing and you teach writing. To an extent, you have to be you got to know how to write. If you're going to teach writing, you got to know how to do math. If you're going to teach math, I work with teachers that struggle with skills that they teach. And then where's your intellectualism? What do you know about this world? Where's your own consciousness and criticality? And where's your own joy? It doesn't matter if your students are joyful, if your colleagues are joyful, where's your joy? Because that's what matters. That's how you show up, regardless of everyone else's joy. And so the work begins with doing that self-work first, and then moving into your practice. Well, where do these 5 pursuits already show up in my pedagogy, in my leadership? And you don't have to be a veteran teacher. I mean, let me say this. You don't have to be a veteran teacher to be your strongest teaching self. My best year teaching was my first year teaching. I was off the chart. It was like amazing. It's almost like I got a little further down after that. So you can be a pre-service teacher and come out like hitting, like every shot, every unit plan is a hit. And then you could be in this field for 20 years or more and still learn something new. I mean, I get so many emails like, I've been teaching all my life, 30 years, and your model has transformed it. And I started over. So we have to be of the mindset, the same mindset that we want children to have. We want them to be lifelong learners. We have to be lifelong learners. We want, I was a 25-year-old administrator in Cahokia, and I was maybe the youngest. And people made me feel bad. Principals made me feel bad. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're 25 years old. And I said, well, do we say this about professional athletes who come out of high school, getting in the NBA because there was something genius about their gift? Maybe it's something gifted about me too. This is what I would tell at 25. This is how I would talk. Because I knew who I was and whose I was. So I'm saying that, like, we cannot tell students that you can be young, Black, and gifted. And then you got somebody who's a young administrator that might be young, Black, and gifted. You're like, oh, no, you're too young to be gifted. So we have to model and practice what we're asking of our children. We have to take ourselves through the self-work of those 5 pursuits. And then just ask yourself, how do these 5 things already show up in my practice?
For sure. And there's a piece that you mentioned about having the persistence of a child, right? Like children, they're going to ask you a bunch of questions. They're going to want to understand and to find out. And the I don't know, they're like, what do you mean you don't know? Right. And they're going to always want to seek that answer, that opportunity on the other side of if, right? Like they're always eager, for that. And so, like, as practitioners, it's vastly important that we keep that same energy throughout the longevity of our career. Even after we're done, we're still guiding and mentoring someone or somebody's, right?
Absolutely.
And so with that said, in education, we know that it's built up on a bunch of rules and structures and practices that just hold people down for a wide variety of reasons, to uplift, the master's house, as they say. Do you have any examples through your travels throughout the country and also around the world of, these same structures that are built to oppress pedagogy?
So, what's interesting is, there are some implicit, I talk about harm in 2 different ways. There's implicit harm, and then there's explicit harm. Explicit harm are like zero tolerance policies where children are policed because of their hair. Like, you can't talk and be like this. Schools have policies that say you cannot wear your hair natural. We're talking about around the world. These are real. You cannot wear your hair natural. That's an explicitly harmful policy. Other examples that have been made permissible, it's not in the policy, but it's in the practice, where we've seen opt-out forums for Black History Month. We see slavery games being taught or simulations of slavery. All that is explicitly harmful. Most of the work in schools are more implicitly harmful. It's not as blatant. It's not like right there in your face, but harm is harm. I'll give you an example. Let's look at the Common Core state standards. Those standards are not common to Black people in my book. Even though Black people can master those Common Core standards, and despite of not being written to address their histories, their education, their standards, their needs, Black people can excel in them. But we don't want despite of students. I'm tired of saying that, like when I went to high school, I didn't have a teacher of color. I didn't see myself in learning when I moved to the suburbs. And somebody interviewed me recently, and he put in the interview transcript that I moved to the suburbs from Gary, Indiana, to live the American dream. I said, what is this? I said, why would you add that? I didn't say that. I said, what do you mean by American dream? It was not a dream to not see yourself ever in the learning. How is that a dream? Like, just because, we think that, you moved out of Gary, Indiana, so it must be a dream. But in Gary, I saw teachers, I saw myself thriving. And then when I moved to the suburbs, I didn't have that. So, we have to think of this implicit harm. And so I said, I trained my old high school recently, and I said, I achieved despite of, but we don't want to celebrate the resiliency of despite of children. Why not have a curriculum, standards, assessments that assess everything that's to my humanity? And so if you don't have identity in the learning standards, you're not having pursuits and standards for Black children, period. And you can argue for all children. If you're not assessing my joy and my liberation and my identity, you're just assessing skills. That's disconnect and misaligned to my history, you see? So I'm trying to connect children's humanities and their history and their lineage to what we do today. So these examples of implicit harms are real. It shows up in our assessments. It shows up in our standards. It shows up in our curriculum. Teaching a curriculum where children don't see themselves and have an opportunity to learn more than just skills, that's implicitly harmful, teaching skills only to Black children. And again, you can argue all children need those 5 pursuits. All children need joy, criticality. You might argue that white children need to be taught criticality more than Black children. So, these are examples that and I rewrote the Common Core standard. I said, okay, well, what would identity goals look like? I'm talking to myself. What would joy goals look like? And that's what I've been doing is rewrite. What would joy assessments look like? So all these things I've been sort of rewriting. And if I can do it by myself, imagine given the genius and the resources we have in this country, what we can do. I want to be clear. The United States Department of Education has the means, the resources, the genius to put out a free curriculum, better learning standards, better curriculum, examples of better assessments. All we do is use money for grants that we don't replicate into larger things. And we're just like, oh yeah, that made a difference in St. Louis, that made a difference in Cahokia, but what about making a difference in the nation? That's what we haven't been able to do. And I don't know why, when we have, again, the resources and genius that we have. So those are just some examples of that implicit harm that I'm seeing. And there's just one word that comes to mind is possibility. Is it possible to change? And I say, yes, of course. I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't believe in what was possible for our children.
Right. And we could be so much further if we just put action behind the possible, right? If we put action behind the if, like if we, you mentioned mediocrity, earlier in our conversation, like if we stop being comfortable with being mediocre, try to almost act as if mediocrity was COVID and put a mask on it, right? And let's move on, let's move forward and also find the vaccine for this.
Yeah.
And so with that said, in your work, you have dove, extremely deep into Black literary societies. And you've uncovered the cultivation of action and its, intellectual and moral reformation, specifically. So if you don't mind, Dr. Muhammad, if you can just expand on that, like, what does this look like in the nurturing of hearts and minds from a context of the Black literary societies that you have studied?
Well, Black literary societies, I didn't learn about them growing up in K-12 education. But as I was reading about them in graduate school, I started to become a better thinker, a better teacher, a better leader. And I noticed that they were what we call social emotional learning now. They were cultivating their minds, their hearts back then. And, they were not just reading and writing for tests or for graduation. They were reading and writing to make the world better and educating themselves in math to make the world better. It was like this larger purpose of ascension. It wasn't to graduate and get into college. That was not the ultimate goals. It's almost comical when you think about them because it's those are so small. And some people say, well, those are big. We could barely graduate our children. It's because you're doing smallness in your curriculum. That's why you can't graduate them. And you can't keep saying, well, I'm afraid to move to ascension because I can't graduate them. No, you can't graduate them because your goal is not ascension. Your goal is passing a test, college, career. Think bigger. Our people were never small people. They were never small thinkers. And if you take their teachings of Black Literary Society members, it can change the way we think of education and what we think of our children. And every time they met, they called their meetings intellectual feasts, which I thought was beautiful. You know, they're like, we're going to be full off of knowledge. You know, and I'm not trying to minimize, you know, the importance of food and nourishment, but, you know, we need that too, right? But it was something like being full off of intellectualism. I mean, knowing new things, like knowledge and intellect were like, it made you feel whole. It made you feel full in these societies. And you know, given the state of the country and brothers and sisters of the South, you know, it's like we're not free until everybody's free. They could have said, well, you know, I'm not thinking about them. I got some liberations. I'm good by myself. That's not what equity is. Equity is like, if you got brothers and sisters anywhere in this world who are suffering or mistreated, you're not fully free yourself unless you're working toward their liberation. So all these things were happening. It wasn't like an either or dilemma. Either I have to focus on skill development and test prep, or identity and joy and criticality. Like, why not have it all? I mean, that's what our children deserve. And if they could have it, if they could do all those things in the 1800s, certainly we can do it now.
Especially, you know, with this influx of technology and program. I had a conversation with a group of teachers. This was several years ago, at the onset of going one-to-one, you know, for every kid. And I tried to empower our educators to understand that, like, while the device is great, we still need teachers to dive deep into the feast, right? The feeding of young people. You know, the part that gets them from one step to the next. Our device is great, but we can do more by having human capital. Yeah.
And everything, you know, students ask us all the time, like, why are we learning this? Sometimes it's just about the joy of knowledge, just of having something new, and they may not see it. It's okay. I mean, we've all been teachers. We know that some lessons don't click in till they're much older. We are just planting the seed for those lessons. They have to have cognitive development sometimes to get the lessons that we're teaching, but it doesn't mean that we stop teaching those things. We teach them so that when they do get older, they're like, that's what they were saying. I can't tell you how many of my old sixth graders and seventh and eighth graders would tell me those things much later. And I'm like, they're like 30 now. And I'm like, finally, you know, that's what I've been trying to tell you this whole time.
For sure.
But it came to them, so I win. It's a success.
Yeah, and as I reflect, it took me until well after high school for me to find that joy and for it to all click for me as well. So it takes us time. It takes us time,
and sometimes much later than high school.
Absolutely. And so as they say, land the plane and come to a point in this feast, I have a few ideas, really quick words. I call this the lightning round. And so I'm going to give you these and just give us, you know, briefly your thoughts around it. Some are a little silly, some are a little bit more serious than others, but I'm excited to hear what you think, okay, or how you think. All right, so here we go. Here's the first one. You're a teacher already. So like if you were to teach one class that you're not already teaching, right? So a class that you're not already teaching, what would it be? Go.
Wow. Do I have to be really skilled at this class already? No. Okay, good. I would do something with like sewing, art, fashion. You know, it's funny. I'm not like a fashionista girl. And I mostly have on sweats most days. But I'm fascinated by the design process of sewing and clothing and fabric and the metaphors that they represent. So I would like to be educated on that and then teach it. Or I would like to teach about species of flowers and floral design. I've always wanted to take classes in floral design.
Oh, look at that. There we go. Thank you for that. All right, here's another one.
Okay.
This one's a little bit more serious. What does anti-bias and anti-racist education look like in practice?
Ooh, so I mean, it means that it doesn't have to be perfect. Like you don't show up, you first have to understand bias is something that you're constantly working, and racism that you're working to dismantle. So don't think you've arrived. It's a constant work. It starts in practice with doing that self work on it and thinking about it and understanding the words we're using. Some people use anti-racism and anti-bias and don't even understand what those words mean. So really just unpacking and what my best friend, Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz, says, archaeological digs of the self. Where's my own bias? Where's my own racism? Where's my own harms that I have in my thinking and my practice that I must disrupt? And then just showing up and being vulnerable with our students, saying that, I'm not perfect. I'm learning this stuff. I might show bias, and call me out on it, critique my teaching, and help me to be a better teacher, and build and doing things collaboratively with students. I stopped writing curriculum for children without meeting them first. And I stopped writing curriculum by myself. As much as I can, I involve the children. I listen to them, because that's the strongest way, through love, dehumanizing practices, and then just listening to them and using their voices to help us be better teachers. That's how we dismantle the bias.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, here's just one word: culture. What does that word mean to you?
The first thought that came to mind is the phrase "for the culture," doing it for the people. For Blackness, for the people. And Blackness is a big part of my culture. And culture is your way of life. I think of the way we live, a group of people who have these shared understandings. And culture is so beautiful because, when I'm with Black women, I don't even have to say anything, and we know what we're saying or talking and thinking without talking. We just know what's happening, and we know what we're all feeling. That's what culture is. It's this shared connectedness of this beautiful something that ties a group of people together. And then I also think of the progress that we can make as culture, and how culture changes over time, hopefully for the better, and just really helps to define who we are. And we can have multiple cultures. We know that we can have multiple sort of group memberships, and but I just think of authenticity. I think of beauty. I think of joy. I think of doing it for the culture, doing it for your people. Yeah.
If you ever put that on a shirt, let me know. I'll get it.
Okay.
Because as you were speaking, there are many times where you may be the only one in the space, for whatever identity we have at that moment.
Yeah.
But at that time, when someone else comes into the room, then all of a sudden, to me, it's almost like magic.
Yeah.
We're connected telepathically, and we're vibing with each other without even speaking a word.
Yeah, and that's why I love Black people so much and love our culture, because I felt that warmth. I feel it. I'm also Muslim, and so I feel that with Muslims. I haven't felt it with all Muslims, and certainly maybe not with all Black people, but that sense of belonging and love, when you don't even have to say anything, you just look at each other and you're like, okay, it's gonna be all right.
It's gonna be all right. And it feels warm too, don't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So Dr. Muhammad, here's my last one. If you could send a message to the entire world, so if the State of Black Educator Symposium is reaching around the world, which it is, if you were to send a message to all of them and you had about 30 seconds to do it, you can take more, it's totally fine. What message would you give the world?
Wow, that's a question.
Boom.
There would be a lot of messages. I would say every day is a moment to get it right, to do better, to be at a state of advancement. If you know something more, even through this engagement and talk, if you know something more today than you knew yesterday, then it's a powerful moment to expand and to ascend. And I would tell the world that they are enough, that possibility is a beautiful thing, to believe in the greatness and power of education, because that is the way of making the world better, is through education. So if we get education right, we get the world right.
That's beautiful. And as I, again, reflect on the time that we spent together, you spoke about the goal being ascension. You talked about, hey, creating a space that fights against mediocrity. You talk very deeply about criticality, critical, cognitive theory, CRT. You spoke about many beautiful and amazing things that also is going to advance the field of education, for the better. What I would like everyone to do who is in the space of the State of Black Educator Symposium Day 1 is to do a few things. Number 1 is to grab your book, Cultivating Genius. Number 2, stick around for Day 2. Team, it has been my pleasure, my honor. I feel like I'm gonna get everything, Dr. Muhammad. But Dr. Muhammad, I want to say thank you from one co-founder of BME STL, EDU Openings, and the Symposium. Thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us. Your joy of knowledge is something that I'm going to take with me for years to come. So again, thank you, Dr. Muhammad.
Thank you so much, Daryl.
This was the spot of an emotional meeting last night. That meeting stemmed from a Supreme Court ruling that allows for unaccredited students to transfer out of their unaccredited schools, and that is dividing this community.
I deserve to not have to worry about my children getting stabbed or taking a drug or getting robbed, because that's the issue.
Why are we taking unaccredited school children and moving them to accredited schools and not expecting the same thing to happen?
They all deserve a chance, but that's a community issue that needs to be addressed within their own community.
Long bus ride into a potentially tense environment.
From the Afton School District in St. Louis, Missouri, where we're proud to be a sponsor of the Black Male Educator Symposium. Thanks to everyone in public education for all that you're doing. Keep up the good work. And a special shout out once again to Dr. Fields and Dr. Diggs for all of their efforts and impact throughout the region. Keep up the good work.
It's enormously important for kids of color to see teachers and educators of colors within their building. But it's also equally important for kids who are white or Asian to see teachers of color, because that's one of the ways that we start to break down these barriers.
We're Navigate STL Schools, and we're here to help St. Louis families by providing resources that foster a better understanding of the K-12 experience and their options that exist in the city. We are so proud to be supporting Black males in education as they mentor the next generation of educators. And you can visit us at our website, navigatestlschools.org, to find out more about us and how you can support.
Have a passion for helping a diverse group of students succeed?
Are you looking to work for a school district where you can truly make a difference in the lives of students and an entire community?
Look no further than the Rittner School District in St. Louis County, Missouri.
Rittner is dedicated to actively recruiting, developing, and retaining a highly qualified and caring staff for the children of our district. Discover your passion, pride, and purpose as a member of the Rittner team.
Rittner has highly competitive salaries, coupled with an outstanding professional development program. We also have great benefits, including medical, dental, and vision, fully paid for by the district, along with an excellent retirement program.
With everything that the Rittner School District has to offer, we hope that you'll join us in creating a brighter future.
Greetings. This is Gloria Latson Billings, Professor Emerita from the University of Wisconsin. And I am delighted to join you as a part of the 2022 Black Educators Symposium. Why don't we get started? I'm going to share my screen so that we can have a good conversation about our children and their education. So I've entitled my presentation, Kaserian Injera, and How Are the Children? Centering Black children in our work and in the world. So again, who am I? I am Gloria Latson Billings. I am a professor emerita from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Now that's just a fancy way of saying that I am retired, but I can tell you that I'm not doing a very good job at retirement. I'm probably working harder and more now than ever before. I am the immediate past president of the National Academy of Education. I am a fellow of the British Academy. I will tell you that I don't actually know what that means, other than I received that honor. I am a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. I'm a fellow of the Hagler Institute of Texas A&M as a part of its 2020-2021 cohort. I'm a fellow of the American Educational Research Association, and I'm currently a distinguished visiting scholar on race and social justice at the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University. So you can see I have not done a good job in retiring. But let's get started with today's presentation. This notion, Kaserian Injera, is a Maasai greeting. If you know anything about the continent of Africa, the Maasai pretty much reside in the area between Kenya and Tanzania. And I say between those areas because they don't recognize the current geopolitical borders. They move back and forth between those places. But Kaserian Injera is a greeting that roughly translates to, and how are the children? As most of us would probably say when we greet someone, how are you doing? The Maasai say, Kaserian Injera, how are the children? And the correct response is, the children are all well. I think the point here is that if your children are well, then everyone in the community will be well. So I asked, how would that question be answered in our communities today? You see a quote from Neil Postman on this slide that says, children are the living messages that we send to a time we will not see. So how our children are really speaks to how our future will be. Well, let's talk a little bit about the condition of children in the United States. So something like 3.7% of our children are in fair or poor health. Think about that. If children are in poor health, it doesn't matter what you're offering in school, they can't take advantage of it. In 2019, 8% of our Black children under the age of 18 lived in a household in which no parent had completed high school. Think about that. You have to deal with parents and help them navigate a school system that they were not successful in. They have difficulty helping students at home once their students get beyond a certain grade level. 56% of our children lived in mother-only households and 9% in father-only households. So now we're talking about 65% of our kids live in a household with one parent. In 2019, 30% of them lived in poverty. Now remember, 2019, these are pre-pandemic numbers. I am sure as the Census Bureau is collecting data, we are seeing that these numbers begin to escalate. The median family owns $3,400 $600, which is just 2% of the $147,000 worth of wealth the median white family owns. Not even $4,000. More than half of the nation's homeless families are Black. And remember, we only make up about 14% of the nation, but we're half of the homeless families. And 1 in 4 Black children actually don't know where their next meal will come from. Think about that. We focus so much on basic academics, but we're not attending to basic needs. And one of the things that the pandemic revealed for us is that we have to attend to students' basic needs. So I just talked about what their lives are like outside of school. But in schools, 45% of Black children are at poverty compared with 8% of white students. About 25% of Black students who were enrolled in public schools, where the school itself was predominantly Black. 16% of Black students are identified with special needs, and 7% of those are identified as emotionally disturbed. So we're layering on issues of poverty, inability to be in a household with more than one parent, poor health. So yes, you can expect that our students have some serious emotional issues. In 2017 and 18, 7% of the public school teachers and 11% of public school principals were Black, while 15% of the public school students were Black. So we have that also imbalance. And among Black 3 to 18-year-olds, only 11% of them had home internet only through their smartphones. In other words, in the midst of the pandemic, they were trying to keep up with school using a phone. Now, you know how hard it is to just be able to follow, say, text on a phone. So even if the school gave them a Chromebook or gave them a tablet, they may not have been able to access the internet because they didn't have the internet connection. So what they had was a phone. And additionally, our Black children are struggling to perform proficient on state reading, language, and mathematics tests. They're less likely to be selected for gifted and talented programs. And 75% of Black children who are considered eligible for advanced placement courses never take one AP class. Now, this is an important data point here, because the way we identify whether or not youngsters are eligible for AP classes is their performance on the PSAT. So here are Black children who take the PSAT and those who are eligible for AP. Of that group, 75% of them never taken AP classes, a variety of reasons. One might be because their school doesn't offer any AP classes because of the quality of their school. But often it's that they feel that they're not able to do the coursework, or more importantly, and where we come in as educators, they don't get encouraged. We don't say to them, you know, you're doing such a good job. Why don't you challenge yourself? Why don't you take an AP class? And finally here, I want to suggest to you is that Black students are more likely to be suspended and expelled from school. So if you're not in school, how can you do well in school? Again, our children are 16.7% of the total school population, but they're only 9.8% of all the gifted and talented education programs. Yet they're 53% of remedial classes and remedial programs. That's the situation that we as Black educators find our own children in. But that's only one side of the story. And I love this proverb that says a story is only half told if there is only one side presented. So what else could we say about Black children in our schools? Often when I do in-person professional development at schools and districts, and there is a mix of teachers of various races and ethnicities, I will ask this question: who is the highest performing subgroup in US schools? A typical answer is Asian Americans. Makes sense, is what you see. You see their representation in gifted and talented. You see their college growing rates. Makes sense to believe that. We also might say white students. Again, makes sense. That's who we see in an AP class or honors program. That's who we see as valedictorians and salutatorians. Rarely, but perhaps based on where someone may be located, parts of Texas or California or New Mexico, Arizona, someone might say Latinx Americans, but that's really not typically what people will say. And almost never does someone say Black Americans. Remember the question: who's the highest performing subgroup in US schools? Turns out the subgroup of Black Americans, Nigerian Americans. Indeed, this is the highest performing subgroup in US schools. So you have to ask yourself, what's going on in these households? What's happening here that these students seem to be doing the best? These pictures are actual Nigerian American students, all of whom during their high school graduation year were admitted to all 8 Ivy League schools. Doing really, really well. And what can we learn from them? Remember the question that frames this talk: and how are the children? So apparently somewhere among the Nigerian community, there is a concern about how the children are doing. But it's not just Nigerian Americans. I don't think anybody's ever talked extensively about the Wade quadruplets. These are 4 young men, all of whom were admitted to various Ivy League schools. Now, they made a commitment and they said, we're going to decide on one that we can all go to. And they decided on Yale. And among them, you have chemical engineers, you have pre-med, you have computer scientists. I mean, these are outstanding African-American young men who are doing well. But we don't talk about them. We don't lift them up as positive examples for our young people to follow. We tend to just lift up people in arts and entertainment, in sports and art, right? So the question, if you can get a group of Nigerians to be totally successful, if you can get a group like the Wade brothers, is the problem inside the school? Or is it beyond the school? Here's what we know. Teachers are accurate in identifying gifted students 2 out of 10 times. In other words, if you have 10 kids, the teacher is going to be able to pick out maybe 2 of them as gifted. But the data and the research suggests to us that parents are accurate in identifying gifted students 6 out of 10 times. And we've seen it. You know, here's a parent with maybe 3 kids, but they notice that one of them is different from the rest of them. They're like, you know, she was always, reading while they were doing something else, or he was one who could take the clock apart, put it back together, make two clocks out of it. I mean, he was just parents can see these differences. But how often do we rely on parent judgment, particularly Black parent judgment, to determine something like giftedness? And high achieving Black students will report the following. One, that teachers doubt their authorship of high quality work. I have a friend who had 3 kids. She had a PhD. Her husband was an MD. And when her children went to school and turned in their work, they were often questioned about who did this for you. One of her daughters wrote for a publication. They no longer publish this anymore, but there used to be a publication called Ebony Jr. And her daughter had written articles for Ebony Jr. And yet her teacher, who happened to be white in a school serving mostly white students, would always challenge her and say, who did this for you? I'm happy to report that quote, child who teachers doubted her ability is currently a pediatrician. So apparently nobody did it for her. She did it for herself. High achieving Black students also report that they're isolated in honors and AP courses. So remember the statistic I gave you about 75% who are eligible not enrolling in AP? This is why, because they're in there by themselves. They don't have friends. They don't have peers. When everybody pairs together to work on a project, they don't have anybody to pair with. So they have to struggle and get this done on their own. They also say that teachers discourage them from taking challenging academics. In other words, teachers will say something to them like, I don't want them to feel bad if they're not successful. I love what educator Howard Fuller from Milwaukee used to say, and that is that poor and working class Black children have as much right to be stressed over their homework as white middle class kids. In other words, we downplay what our kids can actually do. And when they're outstanding students, they're asked to stand apart from their peers. And I'm sure you've heard this so-called acting white phenomena. I want to be clear, this is not something that the kids have made up. This is something that tracks through our history. We were not permitted as a people to learn to read and write. And whenever there was one of us who could do it, first of all, their lives were in danger, but they were told, who do you think you are? You think you're white. In other words, let's not put on the backs of 14, 15, 16-year-olds this phenomenon. This is something that's a part of our culture. And they will tell you that teachers do not share vital advancement opportunities with them. In other words, if there's a college internship program, if there's a summer opportunity program, the teachers don't tell them about it. You are gathering at Harris Stowe College and you're at an HBCU. One of the reasons that I think that I have had a successful professional career is that I started out at HBCU. I went to Morgan State University in Baltimore, where people told me about opportunities. They didn't hide it from me. Very different from the experience that my own children had at predominantly white institutions. Now here, this is me being really Black, y'all. It's time for what I would call a praise break. It's a pedagogical praise break, because I want to suggest to you that if your pedagogy does not change, keep doing the same stuff you've been doing, your students cannot grow. I love John Dewey's statement here that if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. One of the things that this pandemic has revealed to us is that we have to have new ways of teaching. Now, I know a lot of people complain, oh, I can't stand this remote teaching. I know it's been hard, but some of us don't like remote teaching because we wasn't that great in person. So now putting us behind the screen has really made it difficult. So yeah, got a little bit of a shout here on that.
Mark your calendars for the Flipped Job Fair held on Saturday, February 26th at Harris-Stowe State University. We welcome teachers, administrators, substitute teachers, teacher aides, and more. Register by visiting flippedjobfair.com. That's flippedjobfair.com. BJC Healthcare is working with BME-STL and EDU openings to provide COVID-19 vaccines during the Flip Job Fair on Saturday, February 26th from 8:30 to 11:30 a.m. at Harris-Stowe State University. To register, visit flippedjobfair.com.
A person's willpower is like water. Nothing can stop it. It'll pass through mountains. It falls like a waterfall, but it always gets to the place it's supposed to get to. My personal journey through triathlon and growth in education bear many parallels. Each time I approached the water's edge and looked out across the open water, I saw the vast darkness of the water and felt the apprehension of what may be inside the water. I was all alone. I, Dr. Daryl Diggs, will soon release the intimate pages of my journal and share lessons learned in sport and in educational leadership. Coming soon, 2022.
I'm Dr. Charlotte Ej, Director of People, Personnel, and Diversity for the Parkway School District. All of us here in Parkway are honored to once again sponsor the Black Educators Symposium in 2022 and assist them in the mission to shine a light on Black male educators through advocacy, connection, and highlighting the influence we have in the lives of all young people.
Family, that was an incredible day one of the State of Black Educator 2022 Symposium, and I cannot wait to show you for day two tomorrow. So here's the thing. Tomorrow, you'll have a conference. You will have received an email with the logistics, the links, and all the details to jump into the conference. And then after that, you'll get part two of Gloria Lansing-Billings, and then these special remarks of none other than our very own Dr. Dennis Carpenter. I cannot wait for you to see, hear, and experience those two tomorrow. Now, until then, jump on social media. Let's connect. Let's get together. Let's talk about today's experience. And please be sure you use the hashtag SBE22. Jump on Facebook, YouTube, all of those links, and let's connect. Also, don't forget Twitter. Now, tomorrow, what makes tomorrow extremely special is that day two, we have a lot of special surprises, and I cannot wait to show you those. Now, before we go, don't forget, connect tonight on social media. But before we go, I want to give a special thank you to all of you, our guests. Thank you to our sponsors, thank you to our speakers, but also please don't forget the SBE22 Symposium for this year, part 1, part 2, and the conference is all centered and built around the needs of education right now. So let's connect, let's dive in, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.